All right, all right, all right. Can everybody hear me? Press one in the chat if you can hear me. Press one in the chat if you can hear me. Hello, King's Monologue says Trill. Right back at you, King. Right back at you. Hello, Wildflower. Good to see you. Hello, Khalid. Khalid says hello, everyone. Khalid says one. Wildflower says one. King's Monologue is waving at us. Okay, this is good. That's a good omen. We got a heavyweight in the building already. This is brilliant. Okay, sounds like everyone can hear me. I'm gonna put Kamji on, and I'm just gonna ask.
What's good?
There we go. There he is. There's the man himself. I think I'm just gonna get started early because I don't want to waste time tonight. The brother Kamji verse is on with us tonight. With the Trill Nation, and he is going to be going in with us on one of his most recent productions on YouTube. It's about an hour long. It's his latest video on his channel Kamjiverse. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out as well as some of his other stuff. But I think a lot of us will know who Kamjiverse is. He's an OG on this space, and uh, uh, definitely an academic in his own right. So I'm just going to allow Kamjiverse to introduce himself, and we'll proceed from there. Just say hello to the audience, brother
What's
Kamjiverse.
good, everybody? It's Comgyverse. I have a channel about African unity, geopolitics, history, and just getting the accurate information about our Black past in contrast to the propaganda. And I'm excited to be on this live to talk about some of the misconceptions about Bantu with Trill.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. All right. We're gonna be anchoring this with the brother Kamjiverse's video. As I said earlier, just recently out on his channel. So we will be interrupting a lot. So again, if you want, I had on the last two streams ago, I had people in the comments saying, what was it? One of the comments I got, shut up, man, let the man speak. I was thinking, I don't think I don't want to start using flowery language this early on. I want to get this video monetized, but I don't think people understand the concept of a reaction live. It's like you're not here to just watch the video. If you want to watch the video, go. You go on the channel yourself. And so
Yeah.
I do advise that if you want to see the video uninterrupted, Kamjiverse, there's no other name like it on YouTube. You're not gonna get it mistaken with any other channels. Go on the channel and watch the video in its own right. Yes, Wildflower, a lady Wildflower says, smash the like button. Smash the like button. Joseph Elijah says, amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Zoltar the Magnificent. I've not seen that name before. That's a brilliant name.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it is. Let me just get the video on the screen for us. Okay. Anything else you want to add before we go in? Kamjiverse, can you just
Yeah.
kind of give people a rundown of what this Bantu controversy is? Just in your own words.
Yeah. Well, Bantu is one of the many labels, created by Europeans for African people. And it is rooted in pseudo linguistics or a misappropriation of our linguistic history. And the problem with Bantu is that it leads to tribalism and it leads to creating artificial boundaries in the African continent that are not legitimate and they don't stand up to scrutiny. So the reason why I made the video is I wanted to expose people to the history of the classification and tribalist classifications in general and promote more accurate historical linguistics as a way of discerning the truth about our past and the way of building unity based upon accurate information. And when it comes down to it, Bantu just doesn't meet it doesn't meet the metric in terms of or it doesn't pass the test of scrutiny in terms of being valid, accurate, and it leads to more harm than good, especially with respect to harmful harmful concepts such as like the true Negro, and blackness, and the robbery of African culture and the African history, so on and so forth.
Thank you. Thank you. That's that's a good introduction into the topic. It Brother Kamjiver said pseudo linguistics. That's we're gonna well, at least I am. Anyway, I'm gonna murder that term to death. This during this live, because it is exactly that. It's pseudo linguistics. It's pseudo science. It's pseudo history. It's pseudo everything, and yet we have it accepted into the mainstream sort of academic lingo. Academic studies are based on it. It's outsiders looking at Africans and deciding yet again the labels to put on us, and then marketing that to the world and saying this is what it is. It's outsiders speaking on behalf of Africans, and it doesn't. When you look into it, well, the video, this video we're about to watch will show that. So let me not gild the lily, as we say over here. I will just hit play, and I hope everyone enjoys what's about to take place. Right, let's go.
Today, we will discuss some of the flaws of the Bantu paradigm and why Bantu as a concept should be thrown in the dustbin of history. Bantu is a relic of colonial ethnography. To begin, we must start with the German-born South African linguist Wilhelm Bleek, who is the inventor of Bantu in linguistics. The technical term Bantu was first coined by Bleek from the Zulu word Abantu, meaning people. Bleek was one of many colonial ethnographers who sought to categorize African people for European powers, so that they could be easy to manage and control. Wilhelm Bleek's legacy in South Africa extends beyond his contributions to linguistics. It also encompasses his role in perpetuating a racial hierarchy system that significantly impacted education.
I'm going to stop it there and say we got a long way to go. It's a long video. We're not going to finish it. I'm hoping to get about 60%, maybe just over 50% at least done. And again, I encourage you to watch the video in its entirety on Camgiverse. But I just want to say I love how you've gone straight into the debate. Shout out to that. That's like, I need to take that on board for my videos. You just gone straight into the topic, and it's not you go in to define what this is and where it came from. And once again, it comes from this fellow called Wilhelm Bleek.
Yes.
Did you find anything explicitly like white supremacist in Bleek's work, or was it like was it the general tone, or what? Yeah, go on.
Well, Bleek was a student of the father of Hamiticist linguistics, and that was Carl Lepsius. And Carl Lepsius, if you're familiar with the Hamite theory, you understand the idea that white Caucasians came into Africa to civilize the African continent. And many of the earlier ethnographers, they attributed Bantu originally to this group, or Bantu being a mixed group of descendants of the Hamites. If you look at Pritchard's, Kafarian, Clark's Kafir class, prior to the label Bantu, many of the ethnographers of Europe called these populations Kafir, or Kafir for being Negro. It comes from the Arabic word for unbeliever or for heathen. And from the very, very beginning, they were trying to categorize different African populations. And specifically, the reason why the Kafir or the Bantu is important is because they were promoting the idea that this group migrated into South Africa, stole the Khoisan land, took over the population, and then set up their own version of civilization. And this is what gave them the impetus to rob Black people in South Africa of their land and set up apartheid.
Cool. And okay, I'll play the video and you'll see what where this Bantu concept then led on to.
Yeah.
Bleek's work, particularly his publication of Renard the Fox in South Africa, or Hottentot Fables and Tales in 1864, marked a pivotal moment in South African literary history, reflecting a Victorian interpretation of African cultural narratives. His editorial approach, aimed at civilizing indigenous orature, inadvertently contributed to the cultural politics that stifled indigenous expression and shaped South Africa's literary landscape. Bleek's theories of language and race influenced his censorship of indigenous narratives, erasing their original essence and confining Quina imagination within European folktale conventions. This suppression of indigenous voices resonated in the education system, notably with the establishment of the Bantu Education Act in 1953 under apartheid. The act centralized control of African education, relegating it to a separate and inferior status under the Bantu Education Department. The racial hierarchy perpetuated by Bleek's views on language and culture was institutionalized, leading to unequal access to education and resources for Black, colored, and Indian communities. This segregation extended to tertiary education with the extension of University Education Act of 1959, which barred Black students from attending white universities and established segregated tribal colleges. Bleek's influence on cultural representations and his role in shaping colonial narratives underscored the complexities of colonial ethnography, influencing policies that marginalized non-white communities and perpetuated racial inequalities in education.
Okay, let's stop right there. I think I've given it a fair run there, and I want to ask you this, Kamji verse.
Yeah.
This Bantu thing, this classification based on what they thought they could see in patterns, and having classified certain languages as from the Bantu family, they then went on to say these are this black group, these are the Bantus. They're all from the same Genesis. This classification, what did it? Are you saying in this segment that we've just listened to that it was deliberately then used to do what was done in South Africa and apartheid, in the apartheid regime? What exactly are you saying in this segment of your video?
Yeah, Bleek's study of the Bantus formed the basis of the policy used to subjugate Black people in South Africa. Their understanding, because Bleek wasn't the only ethnographer during that time. Pretty much every single classification of African people during that time was connected to, colonialism, imperialism, from Theodore Benfi to Gottlob Adolf Krauss, even though he was a little bit more liberal. They all had the same objective in the sense of putting Black people in certain categories. In many senses, some of them didn't believe that, true Negro languages had the ability to categorize gender or conjugate verbs with respect to gender. Some of them didn't believe that Africans had the ability to use the infinitive or certain prepositions. So they had a lot of crazy theories about, African people and African languages. And the study that Bleek engaged in was like the pinnacle of, apartheid era policies with respect to Black people.
Wow. So you're telling me, right? And again, we've got academics, so-called liberal academics today,
Yeah.
who would wince or shirk at the idea that they're a racist or there's anything racist about their academic discipline, who are using a term that was created in such a pool,
Yeah.
and was then used as the excuse to say. And I just want to add this: it was used as an excuse in South Africa because, as far as I understand it, what they wanted to do was, it was really the Zulus, the natives of South Africa, who were saying, as a group, who were saying, look, this is unjust. We want an equal share in this society. We are the indigenous people to this society. And as a way of attacking and isolating them, this classification of Bantu was used, because it was then used to kind of say, look, you're not even indigenous. Okay,
Yeah.
you're not even indigenous to this area. You are Bantu. The only indigenous people to this place is the Khoisan, and they're the only ones who have a right to say what you're saying. And look, they're quite escaped. They're out in the bushes. So if anyone should talk, it's them, but they don't want anything. So you should just be lucky that you even get anything, because as far as your work, as justice is concerned, you know, we're colonizers just like you, and you've just happened to lose out. And actually, no, we were there before you. We are not newcomer Bantus. We are actually like indigenous to this land. Can you kind of explain that? Because I think that's what sticks in my craw about this
Yeah.
topic. They've weaponized it in that way against the indigenous people of South Africa. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So, and even on the point that you just made, dealing with the Khoisan, Khoisan is actually another label, a false label invented by Leonard Schultz, who was a zoologist, and he didn't really have any history in linguistics. And it was made using the pseudo-linguistic method of mass comparison, where you basically compare a bunch of vocabulary terms in different languages and try to find some degree of statistical correspondences. And that's kind of been the legacy of Khoisan linguistics. But in current historical linguistics, Khoisan is not considered a valid category. It's disputed. But even beyond that, the fact that they use these methodologies to construct these false histories and these false migration patterns is a problem, because they would assume that the Khoisan were always in South Africa, but genetics, like the LO haplogroup, or LOK specifically, does not line up with that. You have LOA in Adaima in ancient Kemet in the south of what's called Egypt today. In the pre-dynastic culture, that LOA marker is very similar to the LOA marker that you see in South Africa today. You
Wow.
also have the canine mesial ridge, which, King's Monologue probably knows about that. And that's a dental pattern that you see in pre-dynastic samples that you also find specifically among the Khoisan today. So this would
Wow.
suggest that many of their ancestors were from the north, before migrating south. And even in correlation with Bantu, the Bantu hypothesis, it being flawed and built upon lexicostatistics and glottochronology, as the video will discuss, it posits that there was a unilinear and unidirectional migration from the Cameroon Nigeria border, and it was violently imposed on the local people of Central and Southern Africa. But further linguistic, archaeological, and genetic research determines this is completely false. And I have a text by Edgar who talks about that as well. And there was more of a multi-generational, multi-directional, and many different areas of the continent mixing that produced these populations that Europeans call Bantu today. So from the perspective of the false migration history and the false homelands using these pseudo-linguistic methodologies, these apartheid era ethnographers literally said, you conquered these people. You conquered these local people and took their land. But when you look at the different registers of linguistics, genetics, archaeology, it doesn't match up. And what really happened is they made up a narrative to justify their geopolitical goal of dominating Black lands and establishing and implementing imperialism.
And today, we have a situation where Africans themselves have adopted
Yeah.
this these labels, these weaponized labels, and are using it amongst themselves. I had a fellow on my last live making a comment in the comment section saying, I mean, I don't know if anyone's seen that exchange. He deleted his response to me, but he came in very rudely saying, "What are you talking about?" I think I opined for about 10 seconds on this in the video. It was a 3-hour video, 3-hour
Yeah.
live. And I opined for about 10, maybe 15 seconds saying, look, we need to get away from this tribe terminology. That this isn't something, at least in my native language, the Yoruba language, it isn't really a word that we have an equivalent for. We have nations, countries, but this tribe thing was something that was imposed on us.
Yeah.
We saw the Hausas as a different nation. We were warring with the northern empires of Usman Dan Fodio for decades before the arrival of the Europeans, because empowered by Islam. I don't know why the lights gone on. Empowered by Islam, they the Northerners were trying to make incursions into the South when the British came around, and we saw them as a different nation. We didn't see them as a different tribe. And I just mentioned, my voice is going all Christina Aguilera on me right now with the national anthem. but pardon me, I'm still recovering from this long cold I've had for like almost a month now. But anyway, I was saying, yeah, something's definitely going around. But I was saying, look, this isn't something, and I know my language, I know my culture. This isn't something that is ours. Tribe, we need to stop it. It's a childish sort of a label that they've put on us. It's dehumanizing almost. You know, tribes. You think of people waving sticks around. We had nations, and this guy, I said that for about 10 seconds, and this guy came in. What are you talking about? Dude, bro, you need to get, you know. And I was like, and I came back with the same energy that individual left, and I just said, you know, look, first of all, you don't. I just basically told him you didn't know what he was talking about. Respectfully, you don't know what you're talking about, and also don't use the word bro in response to me because you've come in rudely saying this and that. He came back with some kind of rubbish about this and that. But I just want to say once again, that's something I'm standing by. We need to kind of stop adopting their terminologies, their classifications, because that's we'll never win this battle as blacks, as Africans, this war to kind of agency, if we keep using their classifications of us. You know, we even, sorry, go on.
I said preach. You're preaching to the choir right now.
Yeah, definitely. I'll play the video then. Let me play the video.
The legacy of Bleek's interventions in South African literature and education serves as a reminder of the enduring impact of colonial ideologies on societal structures and the ongoing struggle for educational equity in post-apartheid South Africa. When it comes to historical linguistics, Bantu has numerous flaws. Dr. S. Lwanga Lunyigo asserts that the notion that language, culture, and race are directly correlated does not stand up to scrutiny. This is evident when considering the example of the Bir language, spoken by both farming and trapping communities in the forest of northeastern Zaire, and by pygmy hunters who have close interactions with them, or neighboring crop growers. Despite speaking the same language, these groups belong to different ethnic backgrounds. Furthermore, the Bira farmers residing in the savannah have distinct lifestyles from their forest-dwelling counterparts who also speak the Bira language. This demonstrates that a single language may not be tied to a singular culture. Conversely, various cultures and ways of life can be observed among people who speak different languages and live in communities adjacent to those mentioned. For instance, the forest-dwelling Bira share similarities in lifestyle with the Walis, who speak a Central Sudanic language, while Pygmies exhibit comparable lifestyles to neighboring Pygmy hunters who speak Sudanic languages. Additionally,
I'll stop it right there. Could you explain to us what you're saying there?
Well, essentially, you know, many of the Bantu scholars, they try to associate Bantu with certain cultural practices. Like you will see ceramics, you will see ironworking, but as the video will explain, there isn't really a coherent one-to-one correlation between language and material cultures. For instance, we both speak English, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same culture or the same practices as, you know, white Anglo English speakers or Indian English speakers. And that's one example. Like two groups can speak the same language but have different material cultures and different histories. And if you want to establish a one-to-one correlation between something like ironworking and the Bantu languages, you have to have linguistic evidence of that. Like you have to have a proto-reconstruction of the term. And you have to also, you know, negate the possibility that this could have been given to them by non so-called Bantu speakers. And this is a practice that historical linguists rigorously go through. But when you examine like Lunyigo in this UNESCO article, what his analysis shows is that when applied to Bantu, these things don't, you know, meet the test of scrutiny. They actually are very, very flawed. especially when you're dealing with these Congolese ethnic groups.
And to add to that, I want to say it would be like there are many similarities in Western European languages, especially Southern Western European languages, and that being coming from the classical traditions, coming for the fact that there are a lot of English, Spanish, French vocabulary isn't actually like indigenous. It isn't germane to England, or it all stems from Latin. So you have that cross cultural. But to then say that the Latin people, the original, the Italians, the Greeks, are one and the same as the Celts and the English, based on that language classification, based on finding those patterns, is wrong, because that was something that was given to them through empire. You know, if the Romans hadn't ventured as far as England, goodness knows, would they maybe still be sacrificing each other to druids and whatnot? Who knows? But that's, you know, they're making these assumptions that they don't make when they study European language groups.
Yeah, they don't, and it's something that in linguistics is called aerial diffusion or borrowing. And just because you have these terms like the Normans conquered England, and they brought in a lot of the Scandinavian, you know, Northern Germanic terms, as well as some French terms as well, into the lexicon, like rendezvous and déjà vu and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they're the exact same, right? So you borrow, like Mexican Spanish has a lot of Nahuatl words and Mayan words, but that doesn't mean that it's indigenous to America. It's clearly an Indo-European language. So that's just one example of that phenomenon.
Excellent, excellent. We welcome Patrina Oldfield to the True Black family. Thank you for becoming a member. Thank you very much, Patrina. I see you there. All right, I'll play the video.
Talk readers, regardless of whether they speak Central Sudanic, Bantu, or Nilotic languages, share similar lifestyles. Thus, the strict correspondence between language and culture is not evident. When it comes to the history of Bantu linguistic classification in the mid-19th century, the genetic relationship between Bantu and West African languages was acknowledged by several researchers. According to Karl Meinhof, Bantu was produced by an Egyptian father and Negritic mother. Reverend John Layton Wilson called the inhabitants of Africa south of the fifth parallel, north members of the great Ethiopian Nilotic family, and distinct from those whom he identified as Negritians, who lived north of this point. To Wilson, those identified as Bantu today are the descendants of the great ancient nations of the Nile in Khat and Kush. During the first half of the 20th century, scholars often treated Bantu as a separate language family from West African languages based on typological grounds, a tradition influenced by paleontology and biology. Despite Proto-West Sudanic and Proto-Bantu's resemblances in basic vocabulary and noun class structure, Westermann initially excluded Bantu from the West Sudanic group in 1927, although he later recognized their genetic relationship. Greenberg's contribution lay in situating Bantu within West Sudanic, renaming the group Niger-Congo. Utilizing evidence from Westermann, Greenberg highlighted resemblances between Proto-West Sudanic and Proto-Bantu in vocabulary and noun class affixes, supporting their inclusion. Greenberg rejected a borrowing hypothesis proposed by Guthrie, citing tonal system agreements and dubious explanations for certain borrowings. He argued that fundamental vocabulary tends to be least subject to borrowing, with some words widely found in West Sudanic but not in Bantu, suggesting shared innovations unique to Bantu. Greenberg's distinction between wide Bantu and narrow Bantu, the latter essentially Guthrie's Bantu, sparked further inquiry into their genetic unity. Williamson extended the notion of wide Bantu, aligning it with Southern Bantoid. However, establishing wide Bantu as a genetic unity necessitates further research due to Greenberg's lack of specific examples. the question of narrow Bantu's unity remains under discussion. Recent scholarship has cast doubt on the traditional conception of narrow Bantu as a genetically unified group. Stewart, 1976.
Right, let me stop it there. By the way, brother Kamjiras, you can interrupt whenever you want to. So if you want to make a point yourself, just let me know and I'll stop the video. I just wanted to say, can you explain to us explain to me because I'm a layman in this area, and you sound like an expert on this. What is the difference between narrow Bantu and wider Bantu?
So these are the border area, the so-called Bontoid border area among Cameroon, on the border of Cameroon and Nigeria. You have like B-Boyd in Equatorial Guinea. And then you have the certain Manenguba languages, in between Zone A, which is in Cameroon, and then Northern Bontoid, kind of north of that point. Many scholars considered wide Bantu to include those groups, and then narrow Bantu does not include those groups. So the main difference in historical linguistics is going to deal with the border area. And Guthrie and Greenberg consistently fought over that. Guthrie was one of the ones who considered Bantu coming from the eastern part of the African continent and migrating down, whereas Greenberg was one of the ones who considered it from the border area, migrating down from the Nigeria Cameroon border area and migrating down on the western side of the continent. And one important thing that kind of skipped a little bit is Karl Meinhof. Karl Meinhof, who was pretty much the inventor of Niger-Congo. And he was one of the main scholars of African linguistics. That dude was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party.
Wow.
Right. He was a member. So a lot of people don't know that, but his research on Bantu was pivotal in the establishment of Hitler's politics on the African continent. Right. And he actually received a medal from the Nazi Party. So that's one thing that not a lot of people know.
So when people throw out the term white supremacist, there's a basis of reality with those terms when we're talking about these academic disciplines and academic practices. There actually is this is literally founded on and in white supremacy.
Yes, 100%, 100%. It's like the fact that because when you use Niger-Congo, you should remember. And by the way, before Niger-Congo, it was actually called niggeritic. Right, using that term, right?
Wow.
And I don't want to get your channel demonetized, but
no. Listen, that's a technical term, so I'll take it up with the AI after the live if they try to play anything funny. That's a technical term. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that was most of these African linguistic working hypotheses started with insults. Again, Kafarian, Kafaritic, that became Bantu, right? Niggeritic, that became Niger-Congo. And when you use the term Niger-Congo, you should actually understand that a Nazi in Karl Meinhof was pivotal in establishing that linguistic grouping.
As can only be expected. Anyway, I'll play the video. Thank you for elucidating on those points. Thanks.
Yep.
Highlights a lack of evidence for common shared innovations supporting narrow Bantu's unity, as noted by Guthrie. Heine was among the first to question this unity, citing Boob's greater distance from the rest of narrow Bantu compared to Tivoid and Ekoid. Presentations at the 1977 Conference on Bantu Expansion further suggested the exclusion of additional languages from narrow Bantu, with Heine, 1980b, specifically mentioning several zones for extraction. Bennett and Sturks, 1977 study introduces further skepticism by dividing narrow Bantu into Equatorial Bantu and Zambezi Bantu based on isoglossic evidence, indicating closer relations with other linguistic groups. Additional studies by Bastien, Coupes, and De Hallo, 1983, using lexicostatistics include Tivoid within narrow Bantu, yet without shared innovation evidence. Despite remaining questions, it's evident that the conventional understanding of narrow Bantu's composition is under scrutiny. Waters, 1989, underscores lingering inquiries about Bantoid internal classification, including both wide and narrow Bantu's integrity. The debate also extends to the origin of Bantu-speaking people, with Greenberg proposing a southeastern Nigeria or western Cameroon origin, followed by rapid migration to the east and south.
Wait, you pause it right here.
Studies
Yep,
in
I'll
the
pause
early
it right now. Let's go.
That was an example of the distinction between Guthrie's narrow Bantu and Greenberg's wide Bantu. So like again, like Maninguba, the Sawa or Douala, Bassa, Beti, and Bam languages, they would be included in wide Bantu, established by Greenberg, whereas narrow Bantu would not include those languages.
Right.
That's all.
Right. Thank you. I wanted to also ask this 1977 conference, just briefly, what was it?
Oh, that was a conference about, Bantu linguistics, trying to figure out, whether or not Bantu is legitimate and if they could connect archaeology and other studies and fields of knowledge to some of the problems and issues. And they were just trying to see is Guthrie right? Is narrow Bantu right? Or is Greenberg's wide Bantu right? And most of them took, excuse me, most of them took Greenberg's side. So that was kind of the pivotal moment in the direction of Bantu studies to figure out like how they could how they could basically fix a lot of their errors in the past and clean it up a little bit. But as you can see today, scholars still wrestle with the same issues that were spoken at that conference in the sense of trying to find direct correlations between material cultures and genetic signatures and the so-called Bantu working hypothesis in linguistics. They still haven't figured it out.
But isn't it also interesting, Bro Kamji? Again, we're talking to Kamjiverse of Kamjiverse fame. A lot of us know who Kamjiverse is.
Subscribe to the channel.
Please, yeah, definitely go on and subscribe to the channel. It's an amazing channel, and it's one. Well, this interview has been conversation has been long in the making. I should have got around to this a long time ago. So again, subscribe to Kamjiverse's channel, please, and go and watch this video in its entirety at some point this week. I want to say, a lot of these names you're reeling off citations is really sad because I'm keeping one eye on the chat, and people are talking about how there's one party saying it's really annoying to have these Western taxonomy of African language and whatnot, and it's really frustrating to have to listen to them. And I agree with that, but at the same time, another side is saying we need what they've in order to counter their lies. We have no choice. We have to engage with this to debunk it, and that it's the way it is. But these names that you're reading off, do you know yourself if half of these people have even had at the time they were writing all this rubbish had even been to Africa? Is that something you know yourself?
Most of them did not, honestly.
Wow.
Some of them, like you in linguistics, and linguistics is a very racist field. A lot of times they would have an African, list off certain basic vocabulary of their language, and then they would copy it down and try to relate it in terms of what's called the IPA or the modes of articulation. Many of them didn't actually have it back then, but that was the attempt of, trying to get a basic uniform depiction of how humans speak language. And they would get these informants, get their data, they would take it back to Europe, America, wherever they were from, and then the linguists would work with them and try to figure out like the different relationship between these African populations. Now, sometimes they would go, sometimes they were funded by whatever colonial empire they were part of or government they were part of on a colonial ethnography mission to categorize these African populations. So regardless of whether or not they went or didn't, the objective was still a very nefarious imperialist objective.
Wow. Okay, I'm I'm gonna press play. Press 1, guys, if you're following, and you are enjoying the conversation, just so we know. Thank you very much. We've got 84 people in the building. Please hit the like button. Let's get that to at least 84 that we got in the building watching. Thank you, guys.
1970s by Henrici, 1973, Heine, 1973, and Heine, Hoff, and Vossen, 1977, support this notion, suggesting a slow penetration of the equatorial forest region, followed by swift expansion into savanna regions to the east and south. The comparative method is traditionally seen as the most reliable way to establish genetic relationships between languages, involving the comparison of lexical items and grammatical forms, setting up correspondences between phonemes and hypothesizing about proto-languages and sound laws. However, its use in Niger-Congo classification has been overlooked, with only micro-level applications to subgroups like Bantu. There has been no comprehensive effort to establish a proto-system for Niger-Congo as a whole. According to Dixon's punctuated equilibrium model, it is impossible to prove that the nodes within Niger-Congo are genetically related. Manfred K.H. Eggert adds to this by affirming that Bantu languages only came to be written down in dictionaries, grammars, texts, and so forth. In the 19th century, there are no genuine linguistic sources in the narrow historical sense of the term prior to that time. That is to say, Bantu languages are not attested by authentic evidence before the 19th century. That is to say, that even the earliest written Bantu material is all but contemporaneous. With the temporal context, historical Bantu linguists tried to reconstruct. Thus, all Bantu reconstruction is based on the comparative method of historical linguistics, or some derivatives of it, developed in the 19th century. By contrast, a number of Indo-European languages are attested to by original texts, some of which go back to the first half of the second millennium BC. Also, while we are dealing with about 300 to 500 Bantu languages, Indo-European is restricted to about 140 languages, which have been intensely studied since the beginning of the 19th century. Today, Indo-European is considered the most exhaustively analyzed language family on a global scale. The important point to remember here concerns the fact that with regard to Bantu, the comparative method is not capable of furnishing any information on the absolute time depth of the reconstructions achieved by it. As just indicated, these are exclusively based on what one might call a kind of linguistic presence.
Sorry, so can you I'm just gonna wait for it to, it keeps kind of getting flustered a bit. I'll wait for it to catch up. I want to ask you, brother Kamjiverse, what point are you making there with the scripts when you talk about the scripts not having Bantu scripts not having been written down prior to the 19th century? And just before you answer, shout out to Black Rampage 2 with the $9.99 super chat. It's always good to see you here. Thank you very much for letting your presence be known with that with that donation. Thank you so much, brother Black Rampage 2. So go on. So brother Kamjiverse, can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so basically, without an attestation, it's difficult to discern the history of the language. So Bantu, like if we're referring to a unified group, we need some evidence for it. In the case of Indo-European, you have Sanskrit, you have Greek, you have Roman, you have even certain Lithuanian languages at the beginning of the Common Era. So they can go back and look at these languages and see, the evolution of these languages through time with respect to their modern descendants. But with Bantu, and especially if you consider like Bantu languages are unrelated to the classical Kemetic language, which we know that that's not true. But if we consider that to be a fact, there's no attestation of these languages in the BC era. So we don't really have any tools in terms of orthography to determine, their historical development. We kind of have to guess based upon what we have today.
And that's what they're doing. They're doing a lot of guesswork and they're presenting it as sophisticated academic inquiry.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, we'll press play.
Consequently, this is also true for all speculative efforts of linking all language detachments or splits in the rainforest and el sewer to an absolute temporal framework. In general, modern historical linguists do not consider the methods of lexicostatistics and glottochronology used to build Bantu as valid. This means that the underlying linguistic configuration of the Bantu languages within Niger-Congo are fraudulent.
Wow.
Dr. Roger Blench states that Bantu is definitely not a group. This may seem surprising in the light of the published claims to the contrary, but the argument from comparative linguistics, which links the highly diverse languages of Zone A to a genuine reconstruction, is non-existent. Most claimed Proto-Bantu is either confined to particular subgroups or is widely attested outside Bantu proper. Blench also affirms that Bantu is definitely not a group. For Dr. Theophile Obenga, Proto-Bantu should not be used in the scientific process of comparing the pharaonic language with modern African languages because of its flawed configuration and the absence of essential linguistic elements observed across the continent. The Egyptologist Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo continues by stating that Bantu is a white South African pseudonym invented to erase to the historical legacy of the great Ethiopian family described in classical literature.
Wow, I just need to stop it there. I just need to stop it there. I was I was happy when I was watching this massive. I watched the video twice over, and each time I got to this bit, I did a little dance. It was amazing. So, can you explain first? So, in two parts, can you give us dissect again what Theophilo Benga was saying there, and the second professor? Can't remember his name now, but yeah, the second professor as well, please.
Yeah, so Theophilo Benga was saying that when you look at Proto-Bantu and the fact that it was built using, the Greenbergian multilateral comparative analysis and mass comparison, lexicostatistics, and glottochronology, it's built using a model that can't detect borrowing and can't detect aerial diffusion between these different populations in Central and Southern Africa. So it doesn't really give us any genealogical facts about the development of these languages. It's more of a synchronic or a same time type of methodology as opposed to a diachronic or a historical methodology. So if you were to use Proto-Bantu as a rubric in the comparison between, say, the Kemetic language and the Khan or the Kemetic language in Yoruba, you will find things in Proto-Bantu that don't match either the Metrem Kimi or Kemetic language or these West African languages. So Obenga said, don't use Proto-Bantu because it's a faulty metric in terms of the evolution of these languages. It'll make you think that certain elements should exist that don't exist, or certain elements don't exist that do exist. And if you were to examine the proto words for bad or bini, and do you speak Yoruba fluently?
Yes, I do fluently. Yeah.
How would you say bad in Yoruba?
Buru, abikoda.
Buru. So you probably have some either some nasal assimilation going on there. I don't want to speak too prematurely, but what I'm trying to state is that if you look at the word for, actually, let me see if I can share my screen. I want to show you this. I want to show you this actually. Let me bring it up because I need to show you the article.
If there's anything I need to do to allow that on my end, let me know, because I'm still kind of new with this.
Yeah, let me see if I could share this. Let me see. Because I don't have the phonological transitions memorized off the top of my head, so I'm going to need some assistance with Obenga's research. Parente Egyptien, Apparente, no. And a lot of his work is in French. Obenga.
I'm just amazed. I'm really amazed. I don't want to say impressed because that's patronizing, but I'm just amazed at the fact that we got Black Americans, all kind of Black people looking into, like, just all of us doing this homework. This is just amazing. There's no, and I want to stress this again, there's no sort of, oh, I'm FBA and I'm African and you're this and that. No, this is awesome. This is how we take back the narrative. This is what I hate to use the they and them paradigm, but this is how they united you know, to do what they did, you know, for bad in terms of how they passed Africa, but we can unite for good, you know. With there
Yeah,
doesn't need to be all this tribalism, you know, for want of a
definitely,
better word.
definitely. Do you see the screen in the background?
Yes, so I'm going to share that now. Brilliant. Okay.
Okay. So this is his article about the phonetic regularity between Yoruba and the Kemetic language. And I'm gonna scroll down a little bit to the part that I'm looking for. So you have the bilabial stop. So germinate ba in Yoruba, place ibu. Is that how you say that?
Yeah. Well done with the good tonality there. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. And B for good deed. And you have bu to detest or bu to abuse, busi to bless, and bes in the Kemetic language. So you can see phonetic correspondence. I think that's bose for
Mm-hmm.
secretly, and bis. And then even in bochi, which would be a so-called Bantu, if we use the European classification, you have boso, right? So he gets into this point down below here. I'm just see if I can find the exact spot. Wa for come and you for come and you
Wow.
wa to be and you to for the copula to be ku to
Mm-hmm.
die and then for death, right? So you have a velar plosive addition, and he gets into that. So right here, he says ancient Egyptian, Coptic, and West African languages have the bilabial plosive b, introducing the nasal n in bin, bon, bone, boni, right?
Mm-hmm.
Proto-Bantu and Common Bantu are not able, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so y'all can see it a little bit better
Thank you.
right there. And he says, Proto-Bantu and Common Bantu are not able to explain the N of the Akan Boni for bad. So the method of presenting Common Bantu as comparative prescription can seriously blind researchers. The reconstruction of be, bad of Common Bantu completely misses a native fact of the term bad in that nasal, in that that nasal in the medial consonant position in most African languages across the continent. And I'm going to scroll up a little bit to try to catch that again. So, where was that item? Beneath, is it here or is it a little bit down? I
What
think
for bad?
yeah, for bad it was
It was further up, I think.
okay, I think it was like beneath, because I
Right.
want to see the Bantu term for that. Oh, there it is.
Oh, okay.
So you see right here bin in Coptic boni. But in
Wow.
Proto
Okay.
Bantu, you see B, in Common Bantu B, right? And then Yoruba, you have EB,
EB. Yeah.
right? So if you were to use the so-called Proto Bantu, European propaganda reconstruction, you miss the medial consonant. You completely miss that, right?
Uh,
So if you were to use, like, I think you use the
which
term.
is a key part.
Oh, it extremely key. Extremely key. Because if you were to use buru, I think is what you said, buru for
Yeah.
bad, that is a you have a nasalization, right?
Mm.
In the sense of the R on the medial position versus the N on the medial position with Coptic, right? So if you were to use Proto-Bantu, you miss that medial consonant fact. And it
Right.
completely blinds researchers. And I think he has a chart here. It's been a while since I opened this up. I think he has a chart here talking about that. Oh, yeah. And then here's another thing. It's unrelated to Semitic. This is another thing. Like Afro-Asiatic falls apart because if you use a mouth, right? Like ro in Yoruba, right? And you see ra and lo, right? That's the liquid transition. Unrelated to Semitic. You have pu, pe, and fu, right? If you look at the transition from the pa to the fa. And even in the S for the initial, you have sa, protection. And in Yoruba, sa, to apply medicine. Akan, sa, to heal. In Bochi, isa, to heal. And then you see sao and sa in the Kemetic language, right? So all that I'm trying to point out is that, Proto-Bantu can confuse things. And in order to have an accurate understanding, you would need to use the Kemetic language because of its time depth and because of the numerous regularities on the phonological and morphological level that you could discern between these languages on the continent.
Oh my goodness. Oh, and this is why it's important for Africans to take back study of their own languages and history. It's crucial. It stands to reason. No other people are so readily told their history by outsiders.
No,
As
not at all.
Africans, as Black people are. It's amazing. But anyway, I'm gonna share the video screen
And
again.
rhoticism, my bad. I screwed that up. But rhoticism would be the terminology if you went from Boni in Kemetic to Buru in Yoruba. Rhoticism in the addition of the R.
Wow. Can I ask, what's your academic background? Because you're very, very adept at this.
Engineering. I was trained as an engineer, but I've had my grandfather was a historian. My family's
Wow.
actually a famous royal family in Africa. So
Oh.
I've been seeing this stuff, just the genealogical transitions between African populations from a very, very young age. And it was a ubiquitous
Mm,
orature speaks
mm,
about our origin in classical Africa and the Nile Valley and
mm.
migrating into Central Africa. So this is something I've been learning from a very young age, but engineering and civilizational development is kind of my
And I
specific
I
back.
would like to add to that, just in case, just to preempt any detractors who say, "Oh, what's an engineer doing talking about this stuff?" They like to retrospectively, detractors like to retrospectively put up the compartmentalization barriers and say you're this, so you can't talk about that and that. Actually, a lot of this stuff, a lot of what the pseudo history and pseudoscience is based on, is based on the works of uh like them or loathe them polymaths. A lot of these people,
Yeah,
Champollion and whatnot, they were multidisciplinary quote unquote genii or geniuses, so please miss us with the you can't talk about this because your discipline is this and that and the other. We're dealing with a highly intelligent academic individual talking about these things here, and reason is reason, logic is logic. As long as you've got a brain and you can read and you're honest,
yeah.
the floor is yours, really. But so that just please
As
don't
long as
even.
you cite your sources, and I actually have a lot of engineering, data that I haven't shared yet that I will share eventually. But as long as if you cite your sources, anybody can
Yeah,
speak about any field.
of course. Amazing. All right, let's go. I'm gonna play the video again. Let's put
Yeah.
this
When
back
it
on.
comes to archaeology, the task of reconstructing historical processes, theoretically straightforward, presents significant challenges when applied to the study of the Bantu expansion in Africa, especially when compared to the more extensively researched Indo-European languages. Despite the abundance of linguistic and archaeological data in the Indo-European context, specialists still hold divergent theories, highlighting the complexity of such endeavors. One of the key difficulties lies in attributing early Iron-Age to Bantu-speaking communities, as the presence of Iran working does not necessarily imply exclusive Bantu involvement. While there is evidence of rapid pottery spread in East Africa coinciding with the expansion of Eastern Bantu languages, the interpretation of these findings as evidence of the Bantu expansion is not without controversy. Limited excavations in other Bantu-speaking regions further complicate efforts to draw conclusive connections between linguistic and archaeological evidence. Additionally, it is plausible that the rapid spread of iron was facilitated by a minority of skilled artisans rather than the broader population. Importantly, archaeology alone cannot determine the language spoken by ancient peoples, emphasizing the need for careful consideration and comparison of linguistic and archaeological data to gain insights into historical processes. The Bantu paradigm is also totally invalid. According to Dr. S. Luanga Lunyigo, the need to separate linguistic data from archaeological data should again be emphasized. This is necessary in order to avoid the danger of confusing the probative value of different disciplines. And More important still, to avoid the intellectual danger of creating a myth, a powerful one, but nonetheless unfounded. There is a temptation on hearing the word Bantu to associate it with an ethnic or national reality, whereas it is only a linguistic label. It does not denote a people or a society or a culture. Bleek's choice of a label was somewhat too apt, and we must now defend ourselves against the consequences. For just as the Hamitic myth grew out of the confusion of language, culture, and race, so also a Bantu myth would be sure to develop from a similar confusion. There are still those who attempt to use archaeology and genetics to validate Bantu as a legitimate category. This is illogical because no amount of material culture and genomic data can replace a failure to apply the historical comparative method to Bantu reconstitution. Felix Chamy's critique of Christopher Ehret's analysis of the Bantu migration exposes many popular myths about its alleged history. Chamy acknowledges Ehret's contribution in challenging the notion of a unified, rapid Bantu expansion across sub-Saharan Africa, but raises significant points of contention regarding Ehret's research. Chamy suggests that Ehret's reliance on lexicostatistics to trace the movement of Bantu speakers from the Cameroon-Gabon area through the Congo forest overlooks crucial archaeological evidence that could enrich our understanding of the Bantu expansions. He highlights recent archaeological findings in Cameroon, which indicate domestication, microlithic industry, and iron smelting dating back to 800 to 200 BC, challenging Ehret's timeline for the spread of Bantu culture and technology. Chamy questions Ehret's assertion that Bantu speakers borrowed language and cultural elements from Sudanian Eastern Sahelian populations in the Great Lake region after their arrival around 1000 BC. He argues that if these purported Bantu speakers had already acquired iron technology before reaching the Great Lake region, as suggested by archaeological evidence, then the need to borrow such elements from other groups becomes questionable. Furthermore, Chamy points out that recent archaeological research along the Tanzanian coast indicates the presence of late Stone Age, LSA, cultures engaging in domestication and trade with the Mediterranean world as early as 800 BC, challenging the timeline proposed by Ehret for the Bantu expansions. Moreover, Chamy critiques Ehret's paradigmatic inclinations, which portray Central and Southern Africans as passive recipients of cultural influences rather than dynamic participants in their own development. He argues against Ehret's characterization of Bantu speakers as inert and lacking in institutions or inclinations for empire building, suggesting that such views limit our understanding of the agency and complexity of ancient African societies.
All right, let me stop it right there. A couple of questions for you here, because I wanted the I wanted the video to run on for a good cause before we interrupted it again, and it's done that. Professor Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo.
Bilolo,
He said, he said something very key earlier. I forgot to make sure we touched on that, but I'll do it now. He said about how Bantu was designed or formed to exclude the sort of classical traditions, pinning, sort of linking Ethiopia and Kush to wider Africans.
The main classical sources, and Felix Chamy, we discussed that a little bit earlier in the video. He talks about this in his work. When you're dealing with Punt or Puanit, right, or Panchia that the Romans classified, they considered that Central and Southern Africa. Even John Layton Wilson, he called the great Ethiopian family as all of the Africans south of the 15th degree north parallel, right? So Bantu is kind of a way of confounding that and disconnecting that and creating a huge dividing line, because when you say Bantu today, you don't think of Kush, you don't think of Punt, you don't think of these great empires that the ancient Kemetic people said, these are our ancestors. We come from them, right? These people are the authors of civilization. This is the land of gods, Tan Netter, right? It was a key tool that they used to completely just confound that, confuse that, blur the lines. And so now we think that Ubuntu is just some, disconnected recipient of civilization, as opposed to a dynamic participant in the development of African civilization. So that was
Wow.
what Bilolo was trying to articulate.
Wow. And that's exactly what turned my feelers onto this issue. You would have a video, don't matter where you saw it, you could see it on, excuse me. You could see it on Know Thyself, Kweli Mika, The King's Monologue, my channel, your channel, Camgiverse, and somewhere in the comments, somewhere in the comments, you'd have somebody come along, some no good, bitter type, sitting in his basement somewhere, just angry at the thought of black people just happy about their heritage. Just come on and say, this has nothing to do with you. You guys are Bantu. It's like, dude, we're showing you images, we're showing you artifacts of people that look black African doing incredible things. It's not good enough because you obviously have your little inferiority complex, so you have to jump on and say, actually it's not you. And you can see how, if you trace that, the only it's the natural, sorry to get confused there in my words, it's the natural conclusion of this taxonomy that they've created. It is the natural use of it. So I'm not one of these that believes that these people bumble, or that they're just making honest academic mistakes, at least not the creators of these paradigms anyway.
No, not at all. And again, like when you go back, even as early as John Layton Wilson, the earliest, association of Bantus are with the ancient Ethiopians. It's only now that where you have Guthrie, who actually believed that it was an easterly migration, Greenberg, who believed that it was a westerly migration in the debate of wide versus narrow Bantu. It's only in the post-Greenbergian sense that now, like, it's completely confounded, completely separated from Kush and Punt. And these are just a caged Negroid population on the interior of the African continent, divorced from civilization. That's relatively recent that they came up with that.
It boggles my mind as to how people can't see this. And before we came on, you were talking about how and I want to touch on it because it really disappoints me that content creators that I respect are using these terms. I mean, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna call him out and say Home Team History was a guy that I highly respect, but he uses a lot of their monikers for us. He goes down the beaten path that they've created for us quite a lot in his videos, and I don't understand why he would do that, So I mean, his latest video is on Bantu technological advancements, as if to say that can be separated from the Moors or the technological achievements of the Egyptians or the Kushites. It's like
Yeah, and you're starting from a bad place, because I think he mentioned like proto Niger Congo to discern proto Bantu development, but that is a bad starting place, a terrible configuration, because none of these Greenbergian phylums have been reconstructed. We don't have a proto Bantu reconstruction. We do not have a unified proto Niger Congo reconstruction to pass what Dr. Bruce Dixon's punctuated equilibrium model discerns with respect to historical borrowing or aerial diffusion. So if you don't have a proto-population, you can't just attach a material culture or a genetic signature to that group, because it's hypothetical at best. It's completely hypothetical, right? So to entertain, and a lot of people entertain Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, when our scholars, Theophilo Obenga and Cheikh Anta Diop, at the Cairo Symposium in 1974, 50 years ago, half a century ago, they cited István Fodor, a Hungarian linguist who destroyed Greenberg's classifications, completely destroyed them, in the sense that they are not based upon the scientific historical comparative approach. They use mass comparison. Historical linguists don't consider Greenberg's methodology to be legitimate. So Theophilo Benga, Diop said, hey, you could take these as a working hypothesis, but we have to replace them over time. We have to use living African languages, terminology developed by African people on the ground to replace these European colonial ethnographic distinctions. And I don't think that 50 years later, even Theophilo Benga, who spoke at the Diop conference last year, he's like, y'all still on Afro-Asiatic? Y'all still doing this? We still doing this 50 years later? I mean, come on. Like, and like you said, for content creators, like, you know, for home team history, right? And I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he doesn't know this, but if you do know this, and you do know the colonial legacy behind these categories, if you are continuing to use them, that is damaging to Black people. That is damaging to the future of African scholarship. We have to use accurate methodology. And Theophilo Benga laid out the framework in comparing Metrem and Kimi to modern African languages using the same or a similar analogous model as what was used to develop Indo-European and linking Hindi in northern India to the languages of Europe and the languages of Persia to those same languages. So again, we have the model, not the Afro-Asiatic, pseudo-Afro-Asiatic model, not the Khoisan, not the Bantu Niger-Congo model, but the scientific historical comparative linguistic model, who, you know, linguists like Saussure, you know, multiple linguists like Troy Allen, Satzinger, even European linguists have said that this is a valid field of inquiry, using Metrem and Kimi, or the ancient Kemetic language, to discern the evolution of modern African languages. Point blank, period. So we got to get up with the times. We can't keep, you know, using a pre-1966 methodology as if it's legitimate.
Thank you. And another before we move off this section, just in the last 2-3 minutes of the video, you were mentioning iron age, iron smelting technologies, and how they've jumped to the conclusion that because we found iron smelting in this region, evidence of iron smelting in this region, as per our archaeological exploration, therefore it's Bantu. It's a Bantu incursion. And what can you explain why that's just silly again, just for people who can get that in the video?
Well, do you know the term for iron in Yoruba?
Irony.
Okay, for sure. So like, in terms of the lexical items for iron across the African continent, they're also related, and they're related as iron from the sky, Bat Pet, in the ancient Kemetic language. So if you have a lexical item, like if a group of people has iron in their language, it's really hard to say that they got it from Bantu, quote unquote, if they're not Bantu and they have iron, because where did they get it from? Right. What it is, right? Also, you know, iron is associated with gestational themes from classical Africa to West Central and Southern Africa. It's also associated with state formalities, and I have a video on this coming up, in the sense that in classical Africa and West Africa, iron is a special guild. So you have to be a specialized guild to be able to work iron. Right. And there's a lot of what you call superstitions, or like juju, like connected with, you know, the usage of iron. And then in Central and Southern Africa, you have the king, or the malopui. We've already used the Lubalunda word, associated with being a blacksmith and working iron. So African people associated iron with state formalities. If this is something that is only a Bantu thing, you wouldn't have these same elements and components within other areas of the African continent. So this is actually, when you look at ironworking, and Hamadi Bakum, Dr. Hamadi Bakum, who is a student of Sheikh Anta Diop, has a great book about iron metallurgy in Africa that I recommend. And he speaks about this. Iron actually unifies the African continent as opposed to separates it into different colonial categories.
I want to play this clip. It's a very short clip.
Finally, get ready for
it's as you're speaking, I was reminded of it, and it relates to the part where you're talking about in your video about iron. So they make these assumptions based on the fact that we found iron, and you made a good point there about how if non-Bantu speakers have iron in their vocabulary, where have they got it from when they're not supposed to have, iron have the technology, because that just belongs to Bantus. Okay, so
Yeah.
this video, every time I think of this pseudo knowledge that they impose on that on Africa, I'm reminded of this clip from Futurama, and I'm just gonna play it. Sack it if it gets done for copyright, but it's important. It's hilarious to me. Play this video.
Some serious moon action.
So Fry and Lena are on the moon, and they're just seeing what the moon looks like 1,000 years in the future. People who know Futurama will know the backstory and everything. I'll start it again.
Finally, get ready for some serious moon action.
The story of lunar exploration started with one man, a man with a dream.
One of these days, Alice, bang, zoom, straight to the moon.
Wow, I never realized the first astronauts were so fat.
That's not an astronaut, it's a TV comedian. And he was just using space travel as a metaphor for beating his wife.
Wow, I could swear I was really playing
Okay,
virtual.
I'll skip
Mister,
ahead.
could you please get
And then this happens later in the thing. So basically, the quick backstory before we get to the main bit of the clip is you've got a guy, Fry. The story of the series is that he finds himself on the eve of the Y2K. He finds himself transported to the future accidentally 1,000 years to the year 3000, and everything's changed in the future, of course. But he gets a job in the future as a intergalactic delivery man, and that one-eyed woman you've seen with him is part of his crew, and they're on a mission to deliver something to the moon. And 1,000 years in the future, in Fry's reality, the moon has been colonized and recolonized by human beings to the state where it's now really just an amusement park. There nothing really goes on there. You can imagine it as a giant sort of dystopian Disney World, and they're on the moon. They're on the moon to deliver a package. But whilst they're on the moon to deliver a package, they go on the rides and the amusement parks on the planet Moon, and this ride is supposedly telling them the history of the moon. So I'll play the germane part of the clip, the bit I found funny.
Oh, doesn't it?
No one knows where, when, or how man first landed on the moon.
I do.
But our fungineers think it might have happened something like this.
We're whalers on the moon.
We carry a harpoon.
But there ain't no whales, so we tell tall tales and sing a whaling tune.
We're whalers.
That's not how it happened.
Oh, really? I don't see you with a fungineering degree.
This is stupid. I'm taking this thing out to the real moon.
Fry.
So they've built this idea. It's so far in the future that nobody really knows how man got to the moon. But you've got this thing called fungineerism. I'm a fungineer, and only fungineers know how man ended up on the moon, and that's their logic, and that's their reason for how we ended up on the moon 1,000 years from now. It's essentially what we've got today with these archaeologists and Egyptologists just running amok over other people's history.
And Trill, like if you talk about Yoruba history, they'll be like the Yoruboid came from the Nigeroid Congoid and migrated down. But if you talk to Yorubas, they're like, no, that's absolutely not. They're from Odudua. Like,
yeah. Can you listen to us and our stories about us?
Like there's no Yoruba word for Niger Congo, right? But you do say Adulawo, right? For black men, and that relates to Kimi and Kemet and Ile Adulawo for Kemet, the nation of black people. That's in Europe.
Wow.
That's an ancient Kemetic.
Wow.
That's clear naming convention.
Wow. I'm gonna look into it. I've never heard that before. I've never heard that phrase. But again, I'm very removed. I speak the language, but I'm very removed. I've been in this country, been in the United Kingdom since I was a wee lad, a wee lad.
Yeah.
So there's a lot growing up that I disdain, that I thought, oh, I don't really need to know about that. I ain't no African booty scratcher. So so I'm learning in my adulthood. So that's on me. That's my fault. But wow, I'm gonna ask my mom about that later this week or weekend. Anyway, brilliant. All right, I'm gonna press play again.
Yeah.
Chamis, analysis of schematic geometric amorphous drawings in the Lake Ukerewe Basin revealed a script that resembles the North African Tifinagh script, which originated from the ancient Kemetic hieroglyphs. This suggests that the people of Central and Southeast Africa had extensive interactions with the ancient civilizations of KMT, Garamante, and Carthage. Chami calls for a paradigmatic shift that recognizes the potential for Central and Southern Africans to have developed centers of civilization and engaged in various enterprises, challenging the prevailing narrative of a violent, disruptive Bantu invasion. Chami concludes by commending Erit for prompting critical reassessment of the traditional narrative of Bantu expansions, but emphasizes the need for a more comprehensive approach that incorporates archaeological, linguistic, and historical evidence. He suggests that by integrating diverse sources of data and adopting a more nuanced understanding of African societies, scholars can achieve a more accurate and holistic interpretation of history. According to the African Union Factbook, another important stream of the emigration form, ancient Egypt came down southwards through the Congo forest. From the Congo forest, some went westwards to occupy the near west coast of Africa. Others more migrated from the Congo forest, precisely around the general area of present-day Cameroon and Gabon, to occupy East Africa and what is today the SADC countries. This was the branch from ancient Egypt that European historians call the Bantus, of the now famous Bantu migration, which took place between T1 1000 BC to 1500 AD. But originally, they were from the stock of ancient Egypt and Nubia, who migrated to avoid the foreign invaders, who attacked their homelands in the Nile Valley. Research by Dr. Kewang et al. Reveals that the southern-bound migration streams into the continent could have been rooted in ancient Kush. The retrieval of ancient DNA, ADNA, from a 4,000-year-old hair sample in Sudan reveals genetic relatedness of the Kerma period individual from Sudan with early pastoral groups in Eastern Africa suggests a possible genetic source population for Eastern African pastoralists, highlighting the rapid southward dispersal of pastoralists from the Middle Nile Valley. The study emphasizes the need for additional ADNA from ancient northeastern African populations and underscores the value of preserved ancient hair as a source of ADNA for future research, particularly where typical ADNA archives are unavailable or poorly preserved. Dr. S. Luanga Lunyigo adds further context to this in affirming that the expansion of these purported Bantus did not assume the dimensions of an exodus from one area to another. It was most probably a movement of small numbers of people from one village to the next, and sometimes back again. A process that was repeated over and over again until successive generations reached all parts of sub-equatorial Africa, perhaps over the space of 1,000 or more years. It should not be imagined that the Bantu migrations took the form of a linear progression, unidirectional, in a perpetual forward movement. On the contrary, over thousands of years, movements must have occurred in all directions. According to Manfred Eggert, since 1977, archaeological fieldwork in the Central African rainforest, spanning regions of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Cameroon.
And that's another good point. These studies always assume that the migrant or movements are one direction and that way only. But again, that's a massive assumption to make, isn't it?
It is, because first of all, you need evidence, linguistic evidence, archaeological evidence, genetic evidence. And another thing is that if you look at diffusionism and the conversation over culture, historical archaeology within, Africana studies, diffusion is the grand sin. You're not allowed to promote diffusionism, especially as it relates to classical Africa to contemporary West and Central Africa. However, diffusionism is perfectly fine when it comes to the Bantus. When you want to say that Bantus came down and conquered Khoisan people and took their land, diffusionism is a-okay. So you can see the hypocrisy, the rank hypocrisy of some of these Eurocentric scholars in using methodologies that they say are invalid, but they are willing to use these invalid methodologies to promote their propaganda.
Right. I want to say massive thank you to Crenshaw Grinder with a $10 super chat. Thank you very much. As we appreciate someone dealing with this Bantu myth to isolate Africans from Kemet. Yes, that's exactly what it is. And again, if you're coming into this naive, you won't see it. But if you've been in this game long enough, you should be attuned to it, which is why I'm surprised that people long in the tooth in this game, OGs, as we've mentioned before, are falling for this particular okie doke. So yeah, once again, thank you, Crenshaw, for that super chat. I'm going to press play again.
Has revealed the presence of pottery producing groups around 800 BC. Early ceramics, dating between 400 and 300 BC, are dispersed across central Cameroon and the inner Congo basin, although site density is inconsistent. Common formal and decorative elements in the pottery suggest potential relationships between the groups that created them, leading to discussions on historical connections. Attempts to correlate Bantu language dispersal with archaeological evidence in the region have faced challenges due to the lack of direct association between languages and material culture. While migrations typically leave material traces, the current archaeological record in the rainforest lacks sufficient interconnectedness to support claims of a steady influx of Bantu speakers. In summary, there is no archaeological evidence for a mass Bantu migration. Archaeological data, including radiocarbon dating, offer insights into the past, but are subject to limitations when linking with linguistic and genetic fields. Despite the challenges, understanding the basis and constraints of chronologies in various disciplines is crucial for interdisciplinary research. Eggert continues on, in affirming that research on Bantu-speaking populations in molecular genetics has grown significantly, aiming to contribute to understanding the dispersal of Bantu languages. Despite this, studies correlating genetic variation with cultural and linguistic diversity in Africa remain insufficiently explored. While geneticists aim to shed light on historical puzzles, they sometimes overestimate the historical potential of their field. Brigitte Packendorf's work emphasizes the co-evolution of genes and languages, highlighting the impact of social interaction and contact-induced language change. Challenges arise in correlating genetic data with a linguistic patterning and language change, as there are no genes specifically for language. Furthermore, genetic studies in Bantu Africa remain limited, particularly in central, southwestern, and southern regions, impacting the potential for comparison with linguistic and archaeological data sets. Interdisciplinary collaboration is crucial, yet there's a tendency for each discipline to seek support from others' conclusions, leading to potential circular reasoning. Molecular genetics, historical linguistics, and archaeology have shown intensive cooperation in recent years, yet archaeology's potential to provide authentic historical evidence is often overlooked. The origins of Bantu languages are believed to stem from northwestern Central Africa, with their speakers likely migrating through the equatorial rainforest on their way south. However, despite the dominance of Bantu languages in the forest, there's a lack of material evidence to support population movements, hindering connections between linguistics, genetics, and archaeology. Without ancient DNA, both genetics and historical linguistics struggle to establish arguments based on authentic evidence. the integration of molecular, linguistic, and archaeological data into a cohesive historical narrative remains elusive, as correlations between these fields are still underdeveloped. The gap between Bantu linguistics' inherent presence and archaeological evidence remains unbridged, as does the disparity between molecular data sets and the linguistic record. Moreover, contemporary molecular data has yet to be linked convincingly to documented human history. This dilemma echoes the philosophical concept of the Munchausen trilemma, where the demand for proof leads to logical challenges or an arbitrary suspension of reason. Despite efforts,
I'll stop it there. Can you explain to us that Munchausen trilemma, what it meant? I had to look that up, but I want you to kind of explain to us what that means for in this context of study.
Yeah, well, basically, when we discuss the fact that the linguistic evidence is invalid, the archaeological evidence is invalid, the genetic evidence is invalid, but within Bantu studies, all of those are feeding off each other. Like the archaeology requires the linguistics and the genetics to support itself. The linguistics requires the genetics and the archaeology to support itself. The genetics requires the archaeology and the linguistics to support itself. And they're all invalid, so you have a trilemma. You have a circular trilemma that just falls apart.
I think let me just quickly where does it say? Yes. Right. So I just saw that term of phrase, and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Is that made up or whatever? And it's basically there are three branches of it, and it says on Wikipedia the Munchausen trilemma is that there are only three ways of completing a proof: the circular argument, in which the proof of some proposition presupposes the truth of that very proposition, which is that certainly can be seen in this whole Bantu thing. Is that, like, you've kind of what you've just said, you've got erroneous sort of foundations kind of backing each other up in a kind of circular way. Then you've got regressive argument, in which each proof requires a further proof ad infinitum. It's not really what we're talking about here, but it certainly this Bantu thing can exhibit features of that. And then you've got the dogmatic argument, which rests on accepted precepts, which are merely asserted rather than defended. Again, that can be seen in this, because you've got lots of assumptions that are made in this whole pseudo study that are never they're never forced to answer for. They're never forced to actually say, like, I'm trying to think of a brilliant sort of example of that. I don't know if you can think of one, but there are assumptions. These things are built on assumptions that are never questioned.
I would say, like, white supremacy is an example of that.
Right. I just to think of I'm not sure if this even qualifies as an example of what I'm saying, but the whole Khoisan thing is strange to me, because you've got a group of people who they are now effectively saying are white. They're doing with them what they did with the ancient Egyptians, which again kind of tells me that they might be related to the ancient Egyptians, and they know that, and so they're preempting us by kind of isolating them from Black Africans, because they will say, and there are actually not credible voices, but accepted voices out there on YouTube. I think the King's Monologue did a good live on this individual. I don't want to mention him. This bitter old man on the dark corner of YouTube, saying that the Khoisan, he actually went as far as to say the Khoisan are actually a white group. They're a white group of people deep in Africa, and that's all there is to it. So they're everything but black.
Yeah, they're some of the most ancient group of people on the African continent, right? And Kowena, like, I use the term Kowena in this video because Kowena and San are not necessarily the same. And Leonard Schulze, like, he combined Kowena and San to make Khoisan linguistically, right? But even most modern historical linguists, even the Bantu linguists, will be like, Khoisan. Like, if you look up Khoisan on Wikipedia, they'll be like, it ain't real. it's not real.
Yeah.
It doesn't meet the scrutiny. So the propaganda on that front doesn't work. But they still use the term. They still use that propaganda to promote their politics. So they'll just continue to lie. And we have to be smart enough to not accept their lies.
I wonder if you know if punt or puanit.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know what? Let let the video play on because I don't want this live to go on over time. So I'm going to let it play and then I'll ask the question when you get to that, when the video gets that relevant point.
Historical Bantu linguistics and archaeology haven't provided conclusive solutions to the Bantu problem, and the impact of molecular genetics hasn't significantly altered the overall understanding. While issues of scale play a role, the addition of molecular genetics introduces another layer of complexity, contributing to what can now be described as a trilemma in understanding the Bantu expansion. Felix Chamy provides further clarity by placing Africans historically classified as Bantu within the context of Punt or Puanit. According to his analysis, classical maps often defined ancient Punt. Now turning to the land of Punt, it is well documented that Papio hamidras, Papio anubis, and Papio cynocephalus are species native to sub-Saharan Africa. Remains of these species have been discovered within the Pharaonic civilization, or they are depicted in amulets, as with Papio cynocephalus. All these animals originated from the south, towards the land referred to as Punt or Pwani by the ancient Remenkemi. Dr. Felix Chamy argues that a long-standing colonial legacy has confined the boundaries of Punt to northeast Africa. However, several pieces of evidence support a broader extension of Punt into the Swahili coast, the Great Lakes region, and southern Africa. A comparative analysis of toponyms like Rapta and Azania, found in classical Greek and Roman sources replacing Punt and Panchaea, supports this argument. Many scholars have situated Rapta, the capital of Azania, in the Rufiji River area along the central coast of Tanzania. Additionally, there is
So let's just stop right there. This Puanit and Punt, I have a I have a suspicion, going off of biblical text, that it relates to the word pathros. And I might be wrong, I probably am, but it again in there you've got, I've mentioned this text before and I'll never forget it and I keep going back to it. But in Isaiah somewhere it talks about how God says he will God's sort of angry with the Egyptians, and he says he will return them into a lowly sort of city state, and they will not be as great as they once were, which obviously happened, we know historically. But that word, when I looked into pathros, it literally just meant or patruzi was what it was supposed to be, according to biblical commentators, and they say it's an Egyptian word, patruzi, and it supposedly means the Southlands, just a vague term for the Southlands. And again, Punt, to me, that would correlate with what you're saying here about Punt, which seems to be just a vague a vague word used to denote deeper into Africa, further south into Africa, not the Horn as they like to make it, but literally deep into Africa, into Central Africa and beyond. I don't know what you make of that.
Yeah, I always assume that like Pathros was Kush.
Right.
So like the Sudan area and then down. But basically, if you look at there's a scholar, I'm blanking on his name, Finch, I think it was Finch. He speaks about Punt being related to like the like Takeneset, or the term for umbilical cord, and he links it to epipaleolithic industries, from the south, that migrated north. So the ancient Kemetic people, when they use that term, they were just referring to the southerly land of their ancestors and the southerly origin point of their culture. So it would kind of be a way of, like, an example would be in the American context, if you were to talk about like the South, for instance, or even south of the border, for instance, it's kind of like a a catch-all phrase for all of it, because there's so many different Latin American countries, right? But it's kind of like a catch-all phrase for all of those different societies. And within the context of Punt, it could have been the same way. There could have been a lot of diversity there, but in their mind, they're just like Punt, Puani, land of the gods, land of the ancestors, and they just moved on.
You certainly, if you were using putting it into an American context, you certainly wouldn't say, from New York and talking about the South. You wouldn't limit it to, I don't know, Rhode Island or something.
No.
Yeah, everyone would know you were talking about the South.
Yeah, and the South starts in like Delaware. So like when you say the South from a Mason-Dixon context, that's going to go from Delaware, Maryland, all the way down to like Georgia, Florida, and they know that you're talking about that big group of land.
Yeah. But again, they play dumb. They play dumb when it comes to this, and and
Yeah.
I think they opt for the horn because again, that's not sufficiently. It's not sufficiently removed from whatever was going on in Greece or in places that they like to whitewash.
And because of Semitic, Semitic is there, and they love to connect the Kemetic language with Semitic and Afro-Asiatic when it's not related, and Semitic has so much borrowing from the so-called Cushitic languages, so much that like you look at it and it's like it's predominantly African. And even some scholars were even like, hey, Semitic could have came from Africa. Like Semitic could have legitimately originated. Not everybody agrees with that, but like it is a possibility that it could have came from Africa.
I'll press play.
Evidence of Romans such as Theophilus and Dioscorus visiting the Mozambique Channel during their travels to Azania. When the Roman skipper Diogenes journeyed to Azania, he explored the Great Lakes region and witnessed a mountain he termed the Mountain of the Moon, which is now known as the Ruwenzori Mountain, and identified the river Kagera as the source of the Happy River, which provides water to Lake Ukerewe. Moreover, there are Siderolithic or Iron Age commonalities in Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa, connected to the Savannah Pastoral Neolithic and Denderit culture. Similarities in coinage and Kweli pottery further support this notion within the same geographic zone. Evidence suggests that early Iron Age peoples along the coast of Zanzibar were involved in sailing and international trade. Maps depicting the spread of Punt culture south align with data from the archaeologist and historian Dika Akwa on the Pautaponda diaspora in Central and Southern Africa. With the application of the proper methods in historical linguistics and archaeology, Dika Akwa's model can clarify many of the questions that the flawed Bantu model cannot answer. This is primarily because we have classical attestations for Punt and no examples of any orature in contemporary Africa that refers to people as Bantu, with the usage of ancient Metrem and Kime as a reciprocal reference system, we can these questions linguistically.
So let's just stop there, and that's and just have you Kamjiverse explain to us what you're saying there about the classical attestations.
Yeah. So you see these different Eurasian and African sources talking about Panchia, talking about Azania, literally referring to these different regions, right? And saying that they extended into Central and Southern Africa. So if we were to look at the Nderit culture in the pastoral Neolithic, and even if you wanted to use phylogenetics, you could talk about the EM35 subclade EV1515, which migrated south, represented by EM293, ubiquitous in Central and Southern Africa, that links these, ancient Nile Basin populations to an incursion south over the generations. So when you're looking at these toponyms and you can relate them to orature on the African continent, detailing these different nations and these different polities and entities, that is a more accurate way of discerning the past than starting with like these pseudo-linguistic categories like Bantu, and then just working backwards from your conclusion, basically.
If if you've got these classical attestations over and over again,
Yeah.
why have they, I mean, do you know if they employ these at all in their study, in their classifications?
Well, African-centered scholars do. So,
Mm.
Buba Bingi Balolo, excuse me, Dika Aqua, Shekanta Diop, they do. Augustine Hall does, Nasiri Sari, Hamadi Bakum, even Gono, they do. So African-centered scholars, they are using a uniform methodology with respect to this. But Europeans, anything that doesn't fall in line with their geopolitics or their agenda, they will throw it away. They don't care. They will throw it away. And we
And
have to not take what they say without reasonable doubt. That's something that we definitely have to stop doing.
and that's why it's very important. I second that exactly. And I'll put that in my own words. That's why it's important for us not to jump on their little bandwagons that they create for us, because we're just constantly chasing our tail. If we're now using Bantu because their academia says it's a thing, we're constantly sort of playing their game, and really there's no, how can I say this, there's no actual, it's, as you said, hypocrisy. There's no actual anchor point to this apart from arbitrary, just arbitrariness. It
Yeah.
literally is what they want. So they set the agenda, they have an end point they want to reach, they have a conclusion they want to reach, and so in reaching that conclusion, everything else, all the normal standards and all the normal procedures to reaching proof of your hypothesis goes out the window.
Yeah.
So this classical attestation thing is important because I've noticed the classics. I mean, someone put it really well not long ago. I think it was Professor Carol Cooney in America, in California. This white American lady who tends to favor the African history of the Egyptians. Although she kind of she's a bit wonky a bit, but
Yeah, I've met her personally, and
right.
You're right about that.
Yeah. So but she says literally classics is the study of like white boys, is the study of how great white people are. Okay.
Yeah.
So and that's okay, cool, but keep the same energy, because when it comes to using those classics that you base, those classical sources that you base a lot of your knowledge of ancient history on, when it comes to their attestations of Africans and African groups and how they've moved, you just throw them out the window. And there's only one reason you do that. It's because it doesn't fit what you want to say about us.
Yeah. Facts. And it's so convenient, and I want more Black people to know. And this is like the criticism that I have of some of these content creators, when they just present European sources willy-nilly and they don't provide an African alternative, as if like what they say is the God honest truth without any challenges. That I have a huge problem with that, because that is spreading propaganda without giving us the accurate information that we need to progress.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I'm gonna skip and go to the section on see if I can make the section on phylogenetics.
Yeah, that was at the very end.
Yeah, which is around 48. I'm just wary of the fact that you've got other things to do as well. So
How much more is left on the video right now?
I think we're about over 20 minutes
Oh
away
yeah,
from
that's
the
a lot.
That's
a lot.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go to 40. I think I've got it down as 48 minutes, and I'm gonna go to that because I think that's pretty important what you got to say there as well. Okay, I'll just press play at this point.
etc. is also found. We now know the main lines of the Bakota or even the Kikongo, notes Father Enges Aethiopes.
Right, sorry.
Ho, Gombe,
We're near
Bahandi,
now.
Babinza, Kundu, Pande, Yanzi, Mongo, and others, whom the Nala Dwala recognize as their brothers. Although some European ethnologists insist that there is no Bangala people in Zaire, In fact, more Congolese than the Ngala Douala. The Bangala of Zaire that we have already mentioned are located in the equator region of Zaire, spreading their language, Lingala, and simultaneously their trade in a vast area. It is the Ngala Douala, overflowing the Atlantic coast of Cameroon, Gabon, Nigeria, and Equatorial Guinea, to which the Bombongo are linked as the main core known as Kalbongo by the European navigators of the 16th century, who call them Achalinces Aethiopes, the most important nation of the Western Ethiopoids. The Ngala Douala people experienced segmentation that allowed them to generate other peoples. The research connecting Central and Southern Africa to the classical Happy River Basin is proving to be a highly fruitful area of study. Evidence such as the EM35 subclade EFT 321625, found in the first dynasty of ancient Kemet, and the presence of EY161140, subclade in Cameroon, validate a migration from Kemet to West and Central Africa. Additionally, the presence of EM2 haplogroup subclades, such as EM4, 269 and U29 Tai from pre-dynastic Kemet among the Bamileke of Western Cameroon, supports Dr. Dieudonné Toukam's archaeogenetic analysis of the Baladi's origin of the Bamileke. Autosomal and phylogenetic analysis of Central African populations by Dr. Nancy Bird et al. Reveals an ancient Kemetic component among the grass fields people of Western Cameroon. Genome-wide autosomal analysis of Cameroonian populations further validates the Central African Mbedi narratives, affirming a Sudanic origin of Nyalanjam peoples in Central and Southern Africa. The presence of EM2 haplogroup subclades such as EY27258, EY369800, EFT43 and EY36 9824 from pre-dynastic Kemte among the Nguni peoples of southern Africa suggests a classical Happy River Valley origin of the Nguni lineage, while the presence of EM2 and EM35 haplogroup subclades such as EM2 93, EPF 6748.
All right, I want to stop it there. I didn't really know exactly where to stop it there because that was all really amazing information there. Can you crystallize it for people, because that gets very, very technical there? What essentially are you saying with all those genetic terms?
So when you look at these subclades in EM2 and EM35, what you see is a migratory link, in the sense that in Northeast Africa, you have ancestral clades, and then in Central and Southern Africa, you have the descendant clades. So they're associated, these subclades are associated with a link in the classical Happy River Valley, in validation of, the Diop-Obangian migration model, and also in validation of many of the oral traditions that these African populations have. So they're just genetic verification of what our ancestors have articulated about their origins.
Wow. But you won't hear this every I think they do one every year when it's in like the Daily Mail, which is our version of the New York Post here in the UK.
They won't touch this.
they won't touch this, but they will show you studies that purportedly link the Egyptians to Turks or something like that,
or like Irish people.
yeah exactly. Again, everyone but the people who they shared actual land with. But yeah, so again, that I found this section amazing. So you're talking about, and this again throws all this artificial categorization such as Bantu. It just throws it out the water completely. It's like, I recently got, someone said in the chat just now, the fact that Bantu not existing is one of the craziest plot twists of my life. That's how that's how ingrained this has become.
Yeah.
I'm even surprised it's become that ingrained, because I relatively recently only learned about the whole Bantu thing maybe 3 years ago. 3-4 years ago I came across it. Before that, I mean, I'd heard it before, but I didn't know much about it. But 3-4 years ago I was like, wow, this is a real thing. Like, what? So you're saying, oh, I'm supposed to be Bantu? Like, what? Never heard that before.
We could take it a step further. Afro-Asiatic does not exist. Nilo-Saharan does not exist. Niger-Congo does not exist. Khoisan does not exist. These are all European colonial categories.
Amen. 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 So, and again, if you're just joining us, these have real world knock-on effects. These categorizations, they cause division where there is none, where people have not seen themselves as separate. As far as I know, to take it back to the South African context, as far as I know, the Zulus weren't just hostile neighbors with the San. They intermarried a lot of the time.
Yeah, they intermingled. So, like, their genetics are connected, culture is intermingled with one another. So
how they're supposedly separate, and it's just see-through once you know like what's going on. Another plot twist is the fact that I don't know if anyone knows anything about the Rwandan genocide, but I was looking into that recently. But all of that comes out of a pseudo classification of peoples that was brought in by Europeans, that the people themselves didn't. Apparently, Hutu and Tutsi had nothing to do with race. It had more to do with a class, a social stratification.
Yes, Hamidicism.
Sorry, go on.
Hamidicism, and like they said that the Tutsis were the Hamites and the Hutus were the Negroes. And again, Bantu studies, I want y'all to remember this. Bantu studies is a child of Hamidicism. There is no Bantu without Hamidicism. Even one of the earlier entries from Lunyigo in the UNESCO General History of African People book, he says that the Bantu myth is akin to the Hamitic myth, right? So the Hutu and Tutsi situation, where you're dealing with related people, only distinction being the social class related to ownership of cattle. But they use Hamidicism and phenotype, like phrenology, nose shape, skull shape, to distinguish these populations. When again, in even among the Yoruba, you have a variety. You got light skin, dark skin, brown skin. People with wider heads, more thinner brachiocephalic versus dolichocephalic versus mesocephalic. Shout out to King's Monologue. But you have this diversity among African populations. But Europeans weaponize this with their narrative to divide and conquer African people. So Bantu is akin to the Hamitic model, the Hamidicism. Wilhelm Bleek, the inventor of Bantu, was a student of Karl Lepsius, the German founder of Hamitic linguistics. You cannot separate Bantuism from Hamidicism. They're like a parent and child.
And look, I keep saying this because some people come in the comments on some of the videos, and they don't seem to get it. I take it from their particular background, and they make comments like, "Oh, we all just need to get along," and like I'm for that too.
Yeah.
But you can't do this stuff. You can't actually delve into his history. It's like asking somebody to untangle a ball of twine without I don't know, without like making a mess. Like, just do it without getting anything else tangled up. Just pull the ball of twine in a straight line, and then it'll just come out in a straight line. No, that's not possible. That's not possible. So when we're digging into this stuff, we have to mention the culprits who have entangled this stuff. And sorry, to hurt your feelings, but they tend to be from a particular substrata of humanity. So we can't, like I titled this video, "How a White Lie Ruined Black Lives." I'm using a pun there, on the phrase "a white lie," an innocent lie, and the fact that this is a lie that comes from white colonizers of Africa. But you can't untangle this stuff without making reference to that. That's impossible. So if you have a guilt about that, that's for you to deal with. Really, it's not for us to try and like play down that part. It's not even for you to deal with it so as much as to say to call it out yourself and be an ally. And I hate to use overtly leftist terms, but yeah, just be an ally and say, you know what, yeah, that this is about the truth, not about, and the truth is these were classifications, these were modelings of history and weaponizations of terms against us by a particular group of people. I happen to be a particular from that group of people. It's sad that my people did that, but okay, let's clarify this now. Let's let's join with those calling it out rather than saying, oh, stop pointing the finger at Whitey. Well, sorry, but Whitey did this. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, facts.
anyway, yeah.
Facts.
I'm gonna let the video play out to the end now.
For sure.
ECT S11 28 and EY25 272. Among the Swahili people aligns with Dr. Felix Chami's analysis of the classical Happy River Valley roots of Swahili civilization. Moreover, according to Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, Mimfon Ibrahim Joya, and the Bamum of Cameroon, retained core elements of the Pharaonic civilization into the late 19th and early 20th century, further solidifying the connection between Central and Southern Africa and the classical Happy River Valley. In conclusion, discarding the terms with a racist colonial and pseudo-scientific legacy, such as Bantu in favor of utilizing terms from living languages like Ngala and Nyalanjam to connect the peoples of Central and Southern Africa to their true roots in the classical Happy River Valley Basin, particularly with ancient Kemet and Kush, represents a pivotal step in historical and cultural accuracy. This approach builds on the Diopian migration model, which emphasizes the deep historical connections between Africa's diverse populations and highlights the importance of reclaiming indigenous languages and narratives. By embracing terms rooted in living languages, such as Ngala and Ngalanjam, we honor the rich heritage and linguistic diversity of African peoples while also acknowledging their shared ancestral origins in the classical Happy River Valley Basin. This paradigm shift not only fosters a more authentic understanding of African history, but also empowers communities to reclaim their narratives and forge stronger connections to their ancestral lands. Ultimately, adopting this approach facilitates a more holistic and inclusive portrayal of Africa's past, present, and future, grounded in the lived experiences and cultural identities of its diverse populations.
That was brought to you. That was a Kamjiverse production, brought to you by Kamjiverse. And I really hope you guys go over to the brother Kamjiverse's channel and subscribe for some really great content on this stuff. I mean, can you just explain to us what Kamjiverse actually means?
So Kamji is a term in Madumba of Western Cameroon, and it basically is like the Magi. If you're familiar with Smash Rockwell, like the Magi being the defenders of the Pharaoh. In the Bamileke Western Cameroonian context, that would be the Kamji, which are the nobles who defend the Mvun, which would be our term for Nisu or Pharaoh. So a Kamji would be basically similar to a vanguard. And I picked the name of the channel because like we are the vanguards of the truth, and we want to establish our own African Black universe. So Kamjiverse is a combination between Kamji and universe to make Kamjiverse.
Wow. I like it. Brilliant.
And I love this space in the background. I love that.
Sorry?
I love the space travel in the background. Like,
right.
I love that.
I think it was a subliminal sort of because I don't know. I think verse kind of played a sort of a subliminal trick on my mind when I was selecting it. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've been listening to Kamjiverse, guys, and I've been massively educated by this conversation. Look out for more of it on my channel and his. There's been a lot left on the table.
Yep.
And don't be surprised if we touch this subject again in the very near future. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to Camgiverse again. Thank you to everyone, RJ McKenzie, Surfactant, Black Rampage 2, lots of you guys out there who've taken part tonight, Patrina Oldfield. Thank you all, guys. Thank you all very much. So very much. I'm getting tied up in my words there. I'm gonna ask you, Camgiverse, just to stay on whilst we talk on the back end of this.
Oh, for sure.
And peace, everyone. From Custer Compton, it's been Trill Black. No doubt. Thank you guys once again.